Hello, I'm Kent Myers.
I'm Mick Cornett, and it's time for the verdict.
As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crowe and Dunleavy Law Firm presents The Verdict, an objective discussion of contemporary legal issues hosted by Kent Myers. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma. And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. We are back to discuss another topical legal issue. As always, let me introduce one of Oklahoma's top legal experts and my co-host, Kent Myers. Kent, today we're back to revisit an issue that's been grabbing the headlines lately. That's education reform. We touched on it some last week, and now we're back to expand on our discussion.
Yes, it's the most important subject we've dealt with in our verdict show so far. It really justifies at least 2 verdict shows, maybe even more, we'll see. But last week we were fortunate to talk about some issues, but we had to leave a lot out. This week, I want us to try to police up some of the more important ones. I think it's important that we focus for a minute on a graphic that I've got. It's a quote from John Adams, the second president of the United States. The whole people must take upon themselves the education of the whole people and be willing to bear the expense of it. That has been the philosophy that we have followed in public education in this country for a long time. We're now hearing a lot of discussion about how the cost of education might be shifted and how it might be, some monies might be going to private schools or to religious organizations or parochial schools. A pretty major shift from what we've done in the past, and we need to explore that a little bit. One thing we really want to talk about today at the end of this show, and that is what is the future of education in Oklahoma and generally, how is it going, so that our viewers can render their own verdict on what ought to happen.
Where are we going and how are we going to pay for it? Those are interesting topics, and in one way or another, they affect everyone in Oklahoma. Educational reform. I would expect another lively discussion right here on The Verdict.
It's got to be around here somewhere.
Don't worry, we'll find it. Just calm down.
I swear it was right here on the desk.
All right, if I were a will, where would I be?
It's the only copy. Without it, we're out $3 million.
I know.
Hey, accidents happen. If a condom breaks
Or you have unprotected sex.
You have 72 hours to reduce
your risk of getting pregnant. It's called emergency contraception. Got questions?
Call Planned Parenthood.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. Oklahoma Lawyers for Children has over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers in Oklahoma County who donate their time and services to represent children. For more information, call 405-23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're discussing education reform and, in a sense, expanding on our previous show. Kent, why don't you introduce our guests?
We have two terrific guests today, one repeat guest that I'll introduce second. First, I'd like to introduce Senator Angela Monson from Oklahoma County, member of the Oklahoma State Senate, member of the Oklahoma Legislature for 11 years. Senator Monson is a graduate of OCU and University of Oklahoma with a master's in public administration. She's been active in education matters and has won Friends of the Children Award of the Oklahoma Association of Education for Young Children. But very, very recently, Mick and Pat, Senator Monson has been elected president-elect of the National Conference of State Legislatures. She is the first Oklahoman ever to hold that position and the first African-American woman to ever hold that position. That's a long introduction to simply say we're really pleased you're here.
Thank you. A long introduction for a very young woman.
That's right. Well, I should have added that. And also a parent.
Thank you. That's correct.
On my right is a repeat guest. Patrick McGuigan, the editorial's editor of the Daily Oklahoman, and Pat could truly be called a student of education. He studied it a lot, he pays attention to it, and he knows what's going on in all areas. He's active in many organizations that deal with education, and we're just really pleased you'd come back and see us again.
Glad to be here again.
Thank you. Well, I want to start out with school funding. And I want to show a graphic, if we may. It's a quote from Paul Trachtenberg of the New Jersey Education Law Center. And he says of all the developed countries, only 2 systematically have spent less money educating poor children than wealthy children. One was South Africa under apartheid. The other is the United States. Senator Monson, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's probably a testament to the investment or the belief that we have in this country that education is maybe not as important as some other issues. I think we realize as a country the value of education. I think most families value education. You'll find that parents want their children to learn more, to go further in their educational pursuits than they were able to obtain. But as a society, as a country, as a public policy entity, our state legislature must ask ourselves regularly the question, do we make enough of an investment? Some would argue we make too much. Some would argue that it's just right. Some would argue that it's not enough. I think we've not spent enough time, however, in the state of Oklahoma and probably in this country, really assessing the value, the return that we receive for the investment made. If we were to look at that question, maybe the answer would be found. I'm going to say this because I think it's important as a parent with a child in public education, that when I walk into a school and I see that there are still, in many cases, 25, 26 first graders and one teacher, and in some cases no teacher aide, or there are 30 or 35 seventh graders in a classroom for English with no teacher aide and one teacher, one can't help wonder if we've not made enough of an investment in the infrastructure to create the buildings, the classrooms, and certainly enough investment in the people capital, the teachers that are necessary to be there with our children.
Pat?
Well, Trachtenberg's quote is really driven more by a legal perspective than by the total dollars spent. We spend a lot on education in America. We spend a lot on education in America. We spend nearly, well, I mean, with all respect, due respect, my friend from last week, Cal Hobson, I've made a joke in the past that as far as he's concerned, we won't spend enough until we spend every taxable dollar on education at all levels. We spend nearly 60% of our state money on education at all levels. That's a lot of money. We are, however, a poor state. And his quote really went more to the issue of how we spend the money that we do gather, because that group is an advocate of, as they define it, equity in spending. And that is that of the money you gather, you then spend it equally on each and every child in, say, a state system. The problem with that is the trade-off in local control. Because if you mandate from the state level that you spend the same, say, in a rural school as you do in an urban school, you might actually be misallocating resources even from Mr. Trachtenberg's perspective. So you got to kind of define what you mean. There would be a huge trade-off in local control, and actually this is one of the issues that we did touch on last week is that the relative benefit of 1017, and I'm a critic of 1017.
You're talking about House Bill 1017.
House Bill 1017, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
But a relative benefit of it is that it did pull in some, not all, it pulled in some through the funding formula of the funding mechanisms to the state level that we then disperse back out to the localities. That pulled in our differential in spending between rich districts and poor districts quite a bit. Some people say not enough. But I would say that to go much further with the funding formula in taking from the wealthier districts and transferring that money to the poorer districts, we would begin to sacrifice the benefits, the upside of local control, which is a great American tradition. So you gotta kind of parse what Trachtenberg means by that statement. We spend a lot on education in America, but there is a differential between what we spend in wealthier districts and in poorer districts, and that's an understandable function of economics.
Senator, let me ask you, the state legislature passed a funding bill this session for education that increased funding, and the governor signed it. I guess it is going to become law, or is law now.
That's correct.
Has that solved our funding problem for education?
Of course it hasn't solved our funding problem. The funding problem won't be solved, and I don't think any of us should ever assume that it'll be solved until the benefit of those expenditures is shown, is seen in what our kids do and how our kids learn and what they produce. The test results, how they perform, when they grow up, what kind of jobs that they can achieve. So the measure is not just a one-time measure. It's not just one time in history, how well a child did on a test result. The measure is how well our society does, how we grow, how our economy grows, how our children can perform once they become adults. It's not enough, and there'll always have to be more until we can actually say we've done every single thing that we can as a society to invest in our children so that they can become the best that we can. That they can. We've done more. Of the new available dollars that we had this year, obviously the bulk of it went to education, to common education. Higher ed got some, but to common ed, teaching our kids. Now, by
common ed, you mean elementary
and high school. Elementary, middle school, high school. But there's still a great deal to do. When I spoke with a young woman at the airport the other day, who was a teacher, a 35-year career teacher, who wanted to come back to Oklahoma, was raised right down the street from me. Wanted to come back, wanted to continue the teaching profession. She said, but I can't afford to come back home. Can't afford to come back because with 35 years of experience, what I'm earning there in that state compared to what I would earn here in Oklahoma is just a small portion. So we do have to make an additional investment to get the best. Yeah, I think education is fundamental. Our doctors learn, lawyers learn, all of us are the product of some educational system. And we can invest all we want in any other area, but if we shortchange our educational system, then we've shortchanged every other area in our society because we cannot ultimately produce the best.
Let me jump in here and send us to a break. Hold that thought. We'll be right back. This is The Verdict. We're discussing educational reform in Oklahoma.
Yeah, campfire's a lot of fun. You get to make some friends. You get to do some cool stuff. Campfire's for boys too, not just girls. But hey, campfire's definitely for kids. So call the campfire office nearest you to join in on the fun. 'Cause let's face it, you're not getting any younger.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. Affordable, private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation under God, indivisible, with
liberty and justice for all.
Every day Americans make this pledge, but few think about its significance. It's our job to make justice a reality by providing legal representation for all citizens. Legal services, keeping the promise of America.
Every day, in state governments throughout the country, crucial decisions are being made that affect the lives of children and their families. But as this process takes place, children are often left voiceless. When these children raise their hands to be heard, is anyone listening? There are people listening. They are child advocates. Join us and raise your hand for kids.
For the second week in a row, we are discussing educational reform in Oklahoma. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers and our guest Patrick McGuigan and State Senator Angela Monson. Kent?
Pat, finish us up on equity funding or on school funding.
Well, not funding per se, but pay salary for our teachers, which is obviously a challenge that we face. We want to try to do better. But we need to do better for the whole economy, because even if everything else stayed the same, if we could get our economy to grow at a growth rate comparable to the national growth rate or even higher, then everything else staying static, you would gradually raise that pay scale higher. The reason we're so far down in teacher pay and in educational pay is that we're far down in all categories because we're a poor state. So we have to grow our economy, we have to become wealthier, as the governor and others have long advocated, and that will help fix some of that problem even before we get into arguments about whether or not across-the-board pay increases are better than pay for performance and other things that would give us incentives to keep our better teachers. So our low ranking is a fundamental problem of our economy, not just our educational system.
Senator, I want to change the focus just a minute to choice. School choice, parental choice. You're a legislator, you're also a parent. What do you think about the school choice, parental choice options that we're making available nowadays?
Well, and I'm going to be a good guest, Kent, but let me say this. The question is, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do we make the investment in our education system, therefore we grow our economy, or does the economy grow and then we make the investment in our education system? School choice. That's what we want to talk about. Do we have enough? Is it good? Is it bad?
Yes.
You know, I have a fundamental issue with school choice because the fact that it's being offered suggests that some are better than others, that there is inequality that exists within school buildings, within the capacity of teachers to teach, within the capacity of administrators to administer, and within the capacity of potentially students to learn. So when we say school choice is important, and we talk later about vouchers is important, it suggests that something fundamentally is wrong with our public education system, and that there is better that can be sought, that can be gained if we allow parents to choose schools that their students should attend. Here in Oklahoma City, we fundamentally have a choice program. In the state of Oklahoma, a choice program that exists. Children can go from one public school to another. Certainly, there are some parameters and some standards that have to be met, but it does exist. Parents do have some choice, and parents ought to be given choice because one school may be located closer to a place of employment, and there may be varying needs of that student, after-school needs, before-school needs. But to choose a school over another school simply because the parent believes they can get a better education at that school, and certainly that exists, suggesting that we have a fundamental problem with offering a high-quality education within our buildings. So the focus should not be making choice, I think, more available for parents, but the focus should be in making all schools quality schools. Therefore, this issue of choice is not an issue.
Well, speaking of the chicken and the egg, you know, which comes first? The option for parents and students to drive the dynamic, or for the system to drive the dynamic. And I don't quarrel with raising the standards and the level of education that's offered and the excellence that's offered across the board, and that's a lot of what we're trying to work for in the Kids Project in Oklahoma City. I do, however, support parental choice in education, including opening our system up even more. The progress that we've made towards parental choice and options across school district lines, certainly within districts, has been very substantial, and I think that it's a benefit to people in Oklahoma City and to some of the other cities that have adopted the same approach since the legislature started allowing that. But if you look at the work of the Education Oversight Board, just recently the Associated Press story that we had in our paper, about only 17% of our schools are reaching the standards that we've set. Now, you can have an argument about, well, maybe we're off on those standards, but we're probably not off by a degree of 2 or 3. Even assuming we were off by a degree of 2, if only 17% of the schools are getting 70% of the kids to where they need to be, we've got a problem. What parental choice does is it empowers the parents to act for educational purposes the way that they do in other arenas of life, and that is as consumers of a product. And education is a product. There's more to it than any kind of an industrial model, but it is a product, and if we embolden ourselves and empower our parents to move from one place to another, if they're unhappy, including into the private system, it will improve the quality of education for all over time. Having said that, I'm for these more incremental steps, but I'm also for that more bold step.
All right, at this point, we need to stop and get a minute or so from each one of our guests. Senator Monson, why don't you start?
I tell you, this time has gone so short. I agree. You know, it's, I guess, maybe amazing to some, Patrick, how much we probably agree on this issue. I don't think we should hold parents captive. We have a public school system in this country that we should bolster, that we should build, that we should increase its capacity to teach and to train our children to be the best that they can be. We have deficiencies, and we have to recognize those deficiencies and address those deficiencies. We should not hold captive parents and students who are in school districts or in schools that are not meeting their needs. We must provide other opportunity. Whether it's choice, I'm not sure if that's the right answer. There are some parents who could not, for any number of reasons, take a child out of one school building and move them to another school building, even if the option was made available to them. Transportation needs, other financial concerns, other concerns that might be present. So I don't want to hold captive then those students who cannot leave to be stuck into a system, a school building that it's not an adequate school building. My sense of this matter as a parent, as a member of the state Senate, is that we must do better to hold accountable our school systems, hold accountable our teachers, hold to some extent accountable parents for being that first teacher. Then we must provide every opportunity that we can to students, to administrators, to districts, to patrons of districts, to create the kind of district that will provide every educational opportunity that we can for our students. It's a difficult task, but it's not one that we cannot accomplish.
Mr. McGuigan, a final minute?
I think that a lot of the incentives in the current system, well-intentioned as those incentives are, tend to build decision-making around the system itself and around the process itself. What I advocate, and what people even like Andrew Young, the former ambassador during the Carter administration and former mayor of Atlanta, advocate, is opening this up much more dramatically, making the child and the child's needs the focus. And that means, if that is the decision, we need to make our funds portable to where they follow children to the school that is best for that child. Whether that's a private school or a public school. That can be done. It's been done in a few cities. The early results tend to be pretty hopeful and optimistic looking. And I hope the country goes more in that direction, and I wish we would start entertaining that in Oklahoma, which we haven't yet.
Ken, once again, our time has gone far too quickly with these two guests. Mr. McGuigan, Senator Monson, thank you for coming in. Kent and I'll be back to wrap it up. I'll have a few final thoughts on the verdict.
This is the face of our future. Full of wonder, enthusiasm, and hope. Little boys who just need a man to walk alongside them. To give them that pat on the back and the affirmation that only a man can bestow on a little guy. And girls who need special attention and a sense of self that sometimes only a woman can help them find. They're looking for guidance, and they're finding it through Big Brothers, Big Sisters.
We're on the green.
In Oklahoma, there are more than 1,600 children waiting to be adopted. They're of all ages. And for many, home has been a source of pain and conflict. They've dreamed of finding a better life and a loving family. Consider adoption. For more information, call 1-877-OK-SWIFT or visit the website www.okdhs.org. Adopt. It may be the toughest job you'll ever love.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and we had some dynamic conversation. The chicken and the egg. We discussed a lot of things, but I know we wanted to discuss some issues that we couldn't get into.
Yes, school vouchers is really a hot topic. It's taking public money and making it available to the student and the parent and letting them attend private school and pay part of the tuition with public money. A subject that raises a lot of serious questions, separation of church and state questions, all kinds of issues. We could do a whole show, and I hope we do someday, on school vouchers. The federal House of Representatives has just passed H.R. 1, which is President Bush's education plan, minus vouchers. So we're going to see a bipartisan effort to get a federal bill for education that's going to, we hope, improve the education system, but it will not touch vouchers, top, side, or bottom. There's one thing that I think I'd like to leave the viewers with. It's something that Lord Brougham said back in the 1700s. Oh, he was my English teacher. But he said, education makes people easy to lead, but difficult to drive. Education makes people easy to govern and impossible to enslave. There just isn't anything that we are dealing with here more important than the education of our most precious resource, our children. So viewers, do it the old way, do it the new way. What's your verdict?
And we'll be back with another edition of The Verdict next week right here on this same channel. See you then. This program was brought to you by Crow and Dunlevy, a professional corporation. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma.